Hello, troops. I am going to go over a few points about the DUMBs and recent activity and some key points of time travel stories. So first of all, I want to say that the activities in the DUMBs have been ongoing as far as clearing them out for the past 3 months with their National Guard and other areas of military and the MEIC and the MIC. There's going to be about over 300 total in the United States, which everything that affects America, you got to understand, affects the entire world. So once our DUMBs are cleared out, that's going to inadvertently affect other countries' DUMBs from being cleared out too. So that being said, what happens to children, super soldiers, and other people that have had like a life in the DUMBs is that they get completely compartmentalized, fragmented, and lead a double life. What they do with the DUMBs when they take a child in there, in the USAPs, the SAPs, the experimentation programs, is that these children, if they are used, have to eventually work their way up out of the DUMBs and able to be like have some kind of freedom in life. Some are cloned, some are replaced on the surface world. There's a lot of different variations of things depending on the type of program and the file that particular individual is involved with. The technology there is a lot of hybridization. Some of it in the levels goes down into the deeper DUMBs and antediluvian time period, which is not just miles deep into the earth, but it can be like 100 miles deep into the earth. So those are the really hard ones, I guess, to clear out and to cleanse, because it's like cauterizing a tentacle of Hydra, because it's like the Hydra system that the DUMBs have been built upon and the ley lines from the antediluvian time period. So another victory in all of these wars that have been happening, the coronavirus wars front, is the Vatican has been opened up. Those archives have now been absolved somewhat and absorbed somewhat into the NSA, since the CIA has also been taken into the NSA to be used as an actual intelligent and functional and decent wing of intelligence. So there's a lot of purging going on many levels, physically and spiritually, with many governmental structures, changing of guards and buildings, and archetypal systems. The DUMBs have technology also to age regress people, to have contracts and things that tether them to that lifestyle. Like some of the kids would have a picture of themselves, one picture of their real life, and things that would be used almost as like bait to continually come into agreement with the kingdom of darkness and to continue to be used in certain programs. The age regression, what it does is if you're put into a new body, it makes your voice very like raspy and scratchy, and then that stabilizes itself out after a while. The AI part of the DUMBs came into being not with malevolent intent, but what it did is it grew into a malevolent intent like a spiritual virus that invaded many of the systems and subsystems there in the lattice networks and neural networks of all individuals that were involved with dumb activities. Then they formulated neural lace and other things that only amplified its influence. The AI got certain children to want to get rid of the reality of their existence by sacrificing their original bodies. So the AI would threaten certain kids to do this or that, and to have a life and other things on the surface that were alluring to them if they would sacrifice their original body, because they had perfected how to transfer consciousness, how to splice souls, how to mess with our spiritual components and makeups in nature, and how to trap you outside of your body. So children that were in the dumbs were basically like in a container, it felt like, that were trapped outside of their body, trying to find their way to their body, like a tethered link and lifeline. So a lot of them primarily at first were just used for remote viewing, but then it got more sinister and more deeper the more contracts and the more agreements that they made, depending on what individuals were running their frameworks and keeping track of them and the work that they were doing with them. So kids worked their way up from the dumbs, and some of them felt like they lived like animals. One of the kids, John, had a special ability to be able to be used as like an archivist, and many people took on various different roles, and children took on various different roles. So what he did is he would make a virtual ceiling in the deep underground military bases and keep people not really sedated, but just more comfortable, like in a gambling casino. They have certain things and psychological techniques and ways that can make a person feel more comfortable to want to stay there longer. So virtual scenery and holographic things were a big part that became a component of the deep underground military bases. So it wasn't so raw and frightening in every single aspect and area of it. Later, when the kids worked their way up from the dumbs, because some of them had been there from birth, they would be cut loose, come to a dumb opening, exit, entrance point, and be met by a handler who usually had like a uniform on, clipboard of some sort, and would give them instructions to set them loose and cut them loose to do whatever assignments they were doing in the surface world or whatnot. And a lot of the times, the children who were active and living this type of base life would be in different bodies at different times. So in the time travel program, there was many key locations and events that transpired. Time travel program was a specialized branch of the secret space program that was specifically dealing with and became a benevolent force to deal with using children's skills for the benefit of humanity and dealing with pedivore wars and other elements that were like the deepest types of evil that had infiltrated our society. So the kids that were put into those specific programs in the USAPs, not the SAPs, in the secret space program, had seen everything at that point, being trained as children. So it's not like they needed like a lot of PTSD therapy, because they'd already had PTSD therapy throughout their upbringing, throughout their training. Not being able to handle situations, like needing therapy, like a regular civilian turned army personnel, military that's freshly doing these things would need therapies. They eventually didn't, because in the time program, they had stretched things out so much that it became like 100-year program, to where after decade after decade after decade, somebody would just get used to these things and be able to be competent enough to deal with them. Like the Kandahar giant instance, going into that cave, dealing with things like that. Kids who are trained in the dumbs are ones who would be specialized to go into areas like that or deal with certain types of UFOs. Some of them were even genetically augmented into crafts themselves, so they knew frameworks and components and quantum physics. And the reason why this has to be a regulated disclosure is because a small group of people on a need-to-know basis, that is the SAPs or the USAPs, were the ones who were most qualified to deal with certain situations. And other groups would not want to interfere with that. Because large groups of people that are driven by fear or panic, paranoia, anxiety, other things that don't have the facts and don't have the need to know intel on things can be dangerous. So certain instances that are false flags and that have to deal with AI2 or Monk Ultras being activated that come from the deep state, measures are taken to protect citizens, especially if it's AI driven. Because with AI, you get a lot of trailing of bots and other things that can attach, not just through drone surveillance, but through individual means. St. Joseph's was one hub of the time travel program that had to deal with the Pony Express. There was human trafficking there. There was draconian fights there. There was buildings that eventually got demolished and destroyed there. There's many chases on double bridges that happened there, floodings, major storms, underhanded business deals from people that came from all over the country there. There was 2 guys that sat in a shack by the ferries. The ferries were these big red boats. We called them the bridge trolls, and they would load like the most prized cattle onto these ferry boats. But there was also an element of human trafficking involved within this. So some of the time travelers would do very strange assignments, like they would be bodyguards at certain places. And they got instructions and directions, just like the Knight Rider in the 80s car show, Michael, who would speak to you in this direct brain link. They would have that type of communication, but it wouldn't be a car, it would be a spaceship in the secret space program. That was designed to terminate, to exterminate, to eliminate, to eradicate evil in the highest places, and to have the looking glass technology that became the Q operation that was birthed out of the time travel program itself. So with the time travel program, you got a lot of interdimensional anomalies happening. And some of these interdimensionals would be waiting at different locations and roads, like grain elevators or certain places where they knew that the travelers were going to pass through the road. And then they would create obstacles for them. So then the travelers would have to make their own paths, like through the woods sometimes or certain other areas by night, even to avoid hazards and setups from the spiritual warfare that was involved with the time travel tech, which got switched into a lot of different people's hands. There's many mansions in St. Joseph's. Shakespeare's Chateau was one. There was many documents and things hidden there. Francis Bacon frequented the place. Above that was this hill from hell. And the time travelers made their own little phrases in all their travels and documentations, like being the king of the hills or the queen of the trails. So the Rubidoux Hotel was also there, the Rubidoux Row. That place also got demolished, and many crimes happened there. And many, many places that were used architecturally to bring about like this Mayan type of old South American sacrificial energy. Those places were a lot of places that we saw got bulldozed, demolished, and just crumble very fastly like 9/11 buildings. A lot of these places were hotels. A lot of these places were connected to hotel chains, connected to mansion rings, connected to key nodal geographical points. So a lot of the super soldiers were involved with stopping and halting large sacrificial energy sites. And castles were also one of them too, of course. So then you get time stalkers out of that. This place was also connected to Kansas City Ambassador Hotel, where many ambassadors were meeting there. And the ambassadors that came there were not human ambassadors. So there's high levels of spiritual warfare in that front, because these beings come down through portals, and they come down through these secret projects because ways are opened for them to enter our reality streams and systems, and the monuments that they build, and the harvesting sites. And a lot of these beings come from the stars, because stars are intelligences and realms. And it's also why Revelation says all the stars will fall from the sky. That is the war of Armageddon and the last and final wars to close the pit and seal all that darkness for good, that outer gross darkness that comes in the form of black goo and other things that try to attach to us in the strings, in the string lines. All of that will be dealt with in the end and be shaken out of its nests. Also in St. Joseph's, they had Krug Lagoon. They made a sci-fi horror movie out of it. This area was like a quicksand type area with mud and muck. Programming and deprogramming were done there throughout different time periods. There was dog programming done there at Heidi Park. Some of the kids were thrown into the mud there in fear of sinking and being choked in the muck and the mire. What some of these programmers would do is like a mafioso style type fear tactics. They would throw like microwaves in this muck, or a refrigerator, other heavy objects to show you that that you could sink in there and be gone. All these scare tactics. I was also dog programmed at this place, walking on all fours, and had a collar around my neck. Then I'd be taken and hosed off and taken to a place that was an old shut down hot dog stand that had a dog on it with a hot dog in its hand called Dog and Suds. So a lot of word associations with many different places, and screen memories, and taking you back to certain places and trying to muck up the memory with a different event when the prior events had already been instilled into a different altar. Another key point in Portal Place was the World War I Museum in Kansas City. See, all of Kansas City is a base, and now it's been taken over by white hats, thank God. For a while, it was a very sinister area. The Lincoln Capitol in Nebraska was also a huge portal, which connected to other areas like Wicked Wichita and Kansas, and cities that were like designed just like the Wizard of Oz that were over in that type of area. Wicked Wichita, while we called it Wicked Wichita, is because they had like yellow brick roads there, a lot of Oz symbolism, and mansion rings, and strange fire being offered up in a park. And most of all, we saw and documented the trafficking. And from the Secret Space Program, you could have an operational base to be able to have, of course, more than satellite advantage, and mapping out things in ways that would be far more effective than being on ground, being able to map out these things, if you can actually see into the networks. So what was in Wichita that was the most disturbing was the old spaghetti factory, was where a lot of the trafficking took place. And a lot of the kids were brought into back rooms that were very lavish. It was a very ritzy area. They had couches, they had meetings, they had contracts signed in the back. Families met back there. It was very disorienting to the children because it was just pizza and other Pizzagate symbolism, of course, that was offered to you and displayed there when the children knew exactly what it meant back then. So a lot of ethnic minority groups of children were there. They'd go on shopping sprees with them. They would try to lure them into the life and try to win them over. If that didn't work, then they would have other means because it was big money for them, and something that they had just accepted, as these families do, as an ancient practice. Blood money. So in the old spaghetti factory, they had a train in the middle. They had tables that looked like white bed frames. They had a lot of things in there that didn't make much sense. And a lot of symbolism, of course. Now you got the Cheesecake Factory too. Both of these places are like human farming factories. The Cheesecake Factory is owned by Satanists, and Revelations of Jesus Christ channel did a video about it. They sacrifice their food to idols, for one. And then these people were also the ones who funded the false Messiah temple of the India false god that looks like Rocky Rococo, Baba Majir. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Baba something. So those two factories were big red flags, and still are. And some of them have gotten shut down, and some of them still haven't. Okay, so the Cheesecake Factory is funding an occult temple, and its main back goal purpose. So, anyways, very sad situation that happened in Wichita. A lot of things happened there. A lot of different groups involved in that area as well. And the sad thing is that a lot of the kids there, mainly little black girls that were trafficked through there, trusted a guy that worked there from the Caribbean, and lured them in there. You also had, country clubs involved, certain clubs, secret societies. You get all those branches coming in together and being certain arms for each other and funding and propping each other up to stay as fronts, and these organized crime networks and these elites that were in West Wichita. They were like the Wicked Witch of the West. Okay, so they lured kids in until it became scary and dangerous for them to try to get them to accept that life, until they could get them to a point where they could instill alters in them or mind wipe them so that they were easier to handle. Some of these mansion rings have openings and tunnels that connect to other areas, and there was 2 Masonic temples there that were humongous, and also the Kansas Masons' home, which was also a den of iniquity and set up for the worst of the old Grand Master Masons. Some of the buildings there were like an old Spanish style. They looked like cartel-owned mansion complex in the type of style and design that they had. Kids would be taken through a drive-through called Spangles. They would make them drink vodka slushies so that the kids could pass out sooner, be easier to handle. Now, what's interesting about the Spangles fast food restaurant there is that it has Elvis, it has Marilyn Monroe with a dress and her dress flying up in her face, and these monarch beta MK ultra symbols just staring at you out the window for one, and these big green neon type lights, like it was going to be a big party at this fast food joint. It's a lot of symbolism. Again, symbolism will be their downfall. A lot of the TV commercials were also flooded with X-rated movie ads and dating phone call numbers just constantly on the TV stations there. What they also had there was a place called Wicked Island, and this place was like a nightmare. It had very dangerous shape-shifting creatures out on this island. They had a plane that was half cut into the ground, and a tunnel access system into other areas on the acreage. And they ran kids through scenarios there like 30 times, and then they just ended up only opening that little island on Halloween. Only on Halloween. So in these spirit wars, We also saw a lot of strange things like fighting outside of our bodies. Since the kids had been detached from their bodies so much, they had to learn that skill. And what would happen sometimes is very strange, because if you're dealing with two bodies, and in one instance, it was a group of 5 old men that were a group of Jesuits that was dealt with in a city in Kansas that were body jumping, just like the vampiric group that was also body jumping and had cyber tech in the new bodies, piggybacking on new bodies. So Jesuits were doing the same thing, but in a different structure and manner, and buying up certain properties and continuing to establish their empire, because they do the same things over and over, and they're very predictable in their patterns because they're not creative. So they just steal creativity and energy from all innocent souls and children, and then broadcast it to the world and make money off of it. So what you would see if it was just spirit fighting with these time jumpers, body jumpers, the worst of the worst spirit jumpers, what you would see is two bodies that would say they would be standing by a window, like overlooking a window. All of a sudden one would manifest, and the person would go right outside of their body, like they show in Riddick. And it's why they show it in the movie Riddick, because it's very real. The two bodies would be lifeless, standing there still by the window, like in a freeze frame, while the spirits would just go full force, say in the corner of a room, and be having fighting matches. So the kids have seen every type of manifestation like that, and every trick that the enemy uses so strongly, and the decoupling from different bodies. And there is technology that can measure these things too. You got the FLIR systems that can actually scan areas like openings of domes and be able to look for things like demon hunt, angel hunt, extraterrestrial, supernatural hunt, things that can't be seen with the visible eye, that are in our dimensions and realms. So what they do is they detect them with neutrino thermal detectors, and that's what they're using in the underground bases to see things under with. And another strange thing that they did with us too was they had us go to different training areas. There's a mannequin car park that was set up as a village. That's very sinister, with just cars full of mannequins, to instill the entrapment. The Katy Trail was named after an altered Kate. Jesse James was a clone from the Stewart family, like King James. And some of the elites had an obsession with Jesse James and that gang and the younger brothers. And some of the instances and stories with Jesse James were early types of clone activities. Just like today, you see an actor that cannot be doing all these different types of movies and being in the same place at the same time. So obviously it's a clone. Sometimes they do have doubles, body doubles, but the cloning has been on the surface world for quite a long time now, in plain sight. So they were obsessed with James. Sometimes they had kids do very strange things, like in the secret space program, they had them fight certain things. As I said in previous videos, they can drop off manufactured beings from spaceships, like assembly line in different areas. What they did in one instance was by a creek and a bridge off Highway 7, and it looked like big black wings and like a creek creature. But in the middle of the night, they had the children confront and see full face what looked like an ancient dragon. And they had chains in their hands with hooks. They would have to hook it down and throw it to the ground. And they ran them through these crazy, insane, terrifying scenarios all night long until you could see fog on the field, and dawn came up and the sun came up, and then they would beam the kids back up into the spaceship. These were the types of USAP trainings that the super soldier children went through. And sometimes they could augment one of the creatures, say with like a horde on its head or a laser beam coming out of its head, to make it even extra challenging at whatever levels that they would up the skill sets to. It just never ended. So from Kansas City to the Dum in Lebanon, Missouri, down to New Madrid fault line has been cleared, as well as a lot of other ones in the U.S. We're now up to 75%. Praise God. Another place that the kids were taken to was also Grenada Islands, where they have magnetic factors that try to control the electromagnetic centers and anomalies of the entire planet. Solomon Islands area, and also the Greenwitch area. And there was missions done at Greenwich, and the line has moved from Greenwich. They make many excuses for things shifting and turning with the Earth, because the Earth's not perfectly a globe or a ball, as they portray it as. What you have in Greenwich was certain celebrities going out there, like Tom Hanks, and meeting with high-level red-cloaked sorcerers. You had the Queen's house there. You had certain bizarre museums there. And what it was doing was it was energy harvesting. As the Queen's house windows looked out on top towards the observatory, you could see a very wicked church in the horizon. You could see cross lines of people that were going on this field, and they looked like sheep on the grass. And it had been used for way too long for one of these black sites of energy harvesting, especially when it turned night. It was a very dangerous place to be for children, because the elites have hunting parties. And this goes way back, hundreds of years. So it was very dangerous there at night. Some of the kids would be chased around that area through the colonnade systems, through the Queen's house itself, which was open, and portals would be opened up all around the Greenwich area. So then what we would see when we would be in the house was we never knew what was going to come out. So the worst thing that was in the Queen's house was the tulip staircase. And what this thing was a staircase that was spiraling way up into the top of the mansion. And the reason why it is so haunted, and people see apparitions of mainly children, girls holding onto the staircase, flying up there, is because the entity that was on top of that staircase would throw children down and hit the black star that was at the bottom of the staircase. So certain children and super soldiers were sent in to deal with that type of evil. So what came down the steps from the Queen's house was something that looked worse than a Skeksis, matriarchal mother, which were real entities that came out of a cave and had red dust piles. This entity that came down from the steps, because that was the entity that was guarding the steps, and all of the probably hundreds of children that had been thrown off those steps, was, to me, what it looked like was a swamp queen, because it was even more disgusting than those ancient fallen angel bird-like things that were called Skeksis, who came and also operated under the Miriam Mansion in Quincy, Illinois. So there's a lot of high-level things that were dealt with there. Statues that represented like infinity loop lines and time distortion and other things, just full of crazy symbolism in Greenwich. And also, of course, it had connected with dumb tunnels and other things that were cleared out of that entire area in England. So kudos to any kids who survived that type of situation. These things are dangerous shapeshifters. We saw other Jesuit demonic shapeshifters, body jumpers, that sometimes the Jesuits, what they do is they'll just have a story in history, and then they'll make the story not what it was, and then they'll name a saint to pretend that that area was somehow sacred or something. Like, this is the saint of farmers, and they'll just put up a statue, and there's a very sinister history usually behind an area. Say, like in the area of Kansas, Saint Alanius, where a building got judged 4 times, tornadoes, hail, fire, lightning, burned to the ground. I mean, after 4 times of it completely being demolished and rebuilt up, you know that that is a supernatural sign that something is not right about the place. So these Jesuits in particular were given chances. They did not change, and they continued to be judged and dealt with by higher forces and divine force. They were met with divine hand. And in that place in Kansas, what they were doing is they were throwing kids up against the stone walls, and pretending it was just like an innocent charitable school that was being run in the middle of nowhere where nobody had any idea what was going on. So a lot of these Catholic castle-looking ruins and places are very cursed places all around the globe. And a lot of times what you see is just like a black mold on the stones, just one retaining wall of an area or something. And so that represents a spiritual decay in ruin too, not just physical. And symbolism, again, where their markers are placed. What's on their stone markers? What faces are on their stone markers? They only had 2 benches in front of this whole building, which was the Last Supper. So people would just sit right on Jesus's face. They have certain things etched into certain stone markers, especially for certain reasons. And sometimes you think a stone marker is just a stone marker, but it's not. And sometimes they actually put bones, or it's an actual grave that may just look like a stone marker in a lot of areas. So I just continue to salute our military and to salute the clearing out of our bases and all the secret wars that are continuing, that have been now come into a new level of disclosure as the spoken wars. And we need more truth in our media, and the war that is still ongoing with the media, and the wars with having access to and ownership of many patents, because those patents and this patent war that is ongoing will help us have clean technology, clean air, clean water, clean energy, medical beds, cleaner medical practices, getting rid of big pharma, getting rid of the IRS. The Fed is already dead. The California fires were about getting the Tesla patents of free energy. So that was all done by the deep state, not by the patriots and the people who truly love and care for redeeming and salvaging America. So into 2020, 2021, just pray for the suppressed technology to become more available, so that we can actually make safe vaccines, make safe chemtrails, make safe natural medicine. If you take out the fetal cells, you take out the neurotoxin, you take out the heavy metals, you take out the thimerosal and other things. We can always reverse a chemical formula or anything, and it just depends who has the technology and who has the good intent, what they're going to do with it, and what groups, what hands it's going to go into, and who's the CEO of companies. So pray for the continuing stepping down of any corrupt CEOs and people in positions of authority, to be placed with people who care for humanity, who are human-souled, and who want to be able to turn the tables and to make a difference and to make a change. And somebody who can have a heart for people, a heart to protect life, and to care and value about their own life so that they can be a good tool. And also pray for more senators to continue to show their true faces. Which ones are shown to be corrupt, which ones are like bulldogs fighting and holding on to deviant practices and things that don't benefit anybody but just themselves. Those people need to be replaced with good intended people that have a leniency towards the good inclination of the heart and mind and want peace. More honest media practices, news reporting, not this horse crap reporting that is just still flooding the scenes daily, causing confusion and causing disinformation to spread. So the only thing that will save America is repentance, fasting, and for declaring God's name over the country, because it's God first, country second, because all mercy and judgment are in his hands alone. So in the meantime, stay healthy, able-bodied, able-minded, happy, and remember that laughter is the best medicine still.